I'm going to stand initially because we're going to explain the theme behind our conference panel this morning, and then we'll sit down and talk. So our panel, as you know, is called Overcoming Marginalization in Governance and Social Policy. Thank you both for your contributions on this point. So in the peace building and inclusive sustainable development field, overcoming marginalization, including everyone in shared prosperity, is understood as key to bringing about positive peace and a flourishing world for all. So I want to open our panel with the words of the Indian writer and public intellectual, Arundhati Roy, who says, "There's really no such thing as the voiceless. There are only the deliberately silenced or the preferably unheard." Roy offers us insight into the kind of double marginalization to which the people who are most impoverished in our world are subject. First, poor people, especially poor women, are absolutely poor, very little financial means. And second, they are treated as if they are poor in their ability to speak for themselves. They are figured as voiceless. Why are they figured as voiceless when they actually do have voices? What would it take to center and listen to and hear them? Our two speakers are thinking about marginalization from the different ends of the spectrum. JBK focuses on a top-down approach to overcoming marginalization. She makes the case for electing more women to high political office. Sakina advocates for a bottom-up approach, where she works in partnership with rural villagers whose voices are often discredited or held as preferably unheard. We're going to think together now about the kinds of marginalization at stake. Whose marginalization? JBK focuses on the marginalization of women in holding political electoral office. She is calling for candidates to have gender parity and suggesting that such parity may pay a dividend in promoting larger gender equity and overcoming structural inequality. This may be because the women elected, with the help of elector, may represent such women. For JBK, the women's voices to be centered are those running for political office. Sakina focuses on the marginalization of rural villagers. She calls for democratized research so that social policy can be fashioned to address the needs and the needs and visions of these women and villagers. According to her methodology, researchers do the best research when they don't seek to speak for or represent others. Social marginalization, in both its forms, being poorer and not being heard, is directly reduced by liberation technology because of who they approach, how they approach them, and why. For Sakina, the crucial voices to be centered are those whom too many politicians fail to represent or to hear on their own terms. Poor rural women like Radha Devi were living without the wages that she's earned. Together, we will have the chance now to consider the pros and cons, being a lawyer, I like to think about those, of working at either end of the spectrum, bottom up and top down. So, come sit down now. I'll turn to you first, JBK. Is getting a woman, any woman in office, a sufficient win for gender equity? Does it matter to you and elect her whether the women it helps elect to high political office are in fact campaigning for, working hard to get broader gender equity and social equity?
Thank you so much, Admi. Yes, it does. And the very first point, and which is electors' first mandate, is to get gender equity in the sense that anybody should be able to run for office. And if society is made up of different groups, why is it just one group that keeps getting to lead others, is one. Two is, when you have women who understand and have had lived experiences of certain issues, they're at least in a sort of good position to be able to advocate for themselves and other women. And I'll give you the case of Nigeria. Recently, about 5 gender-centric bills were thrown out of the House in terms of getting signed. They include issues about women's access to be able to, for their spouses to be able to claim citizenship. or to be able to own land. Now, it's good to have men allies who can campaign for us on the inside, but imagine actually having women championing these issues from the inside themselves. So for our own work, that's how we're seeing, how we're ensuring that women can be a voice for others and ensure that it's really helping to address gender equity across board, across a range of issues, across all spheres of life. Another question is, do we know for sure whether they will get to put all of those changes together? One of the things that we do at Electra is to ensure that we provide capacity building to women before they go into the elections and afterwards. Because their journeys, we've seen that men are so used to being in this space. They have the experience, and women require more. So yes, we know that they have agency. We know that they've had impact. But they face so many issues. And this sort of, in terms of when I say human-centered design, this is what we go through to understand the journeys, understand the different barriers they face, and understanding that at different levels, they require different kinds of capacity building. So getting them to be able to connect with the constituencies they serve, to better represent them, ensuring that their campaign is targeted towards the transformational things that really needs to get the impact beyond just themselves, but others that they're supposed to be serving, and ensuring that even afterwards, when they do get into the office, we continue to work with them to build the data, but to also hold them accountable and ensure that we get a lot of wins to ensure that more women can get into the space. So that's how we're looking at it, and we hope that it can really permeate society in the way that we're thinking about it as well.
Okay, thank you. Sakina, look at us both taking notes here. All right, so picking up on a phrase I know you love so much about take space and making space, tell us about the challenges of making space for those on the margin of particular kinds of power.
Thank you for that question. Is this mic working? Okay, thank you. I could spend a lot of time telling you about the challenges of making space. I'll give you two examples. One from my own, life, and on how it's important also to take space. A few years ago, when I, not a few, like about 5-6 years ago, when I moved to this state of Jharkhand and I went for a meeting with a government official, I went with a male colleague who is a professor at, in a university in the United States, and we were meeting this senior administrative official. And we go in. I'm doing all this work in Jharkhand. I've been spending time there. I have spent 2 years there at this point in time trying to do this work. And we go into the office, we move in, and this senior administrative official only addresses my male colleague, starts speaking, and does not stop for a while. He doesn't even look at me, as if I just was not there in that space. And at some point, that was making me uncomfortable, and I was looking at my male colleague, and at some point, even he realized what's happened. So he stopped the official and said, "Let me introduce you to my colleague, who's actually done all this work." And that's, at that point, is where that was my endeavor in taking space. I didn't say anything myself then, right? I kept quiet too. Now when I go to meetings, I speak up, because I know that that space is mine too, and it's the work that I want. And another example is that in the same official's office in that state, at a later date, his boss was visiting, and his boss was visiting, kind of investigating some of these payment failures that we had written about in the newspaper, and there was like media pressure to work on some of these issues. And when his boss came in, I was sitting on the sofa, and in India, this, which chair and which location you sit in is rather important. So I'm already sitting on the sofa, and then there are 2 chairs there, and the senior official walks in, and the initial officer who didn't even look at me, he's staring at me to get up from the sofa, and I didn't move. So I think just that example, that it takes a lot of time for us to realize that this is our space too. And just in that vein, it's also hard then to expect women who have gone through this marginalization, who have years of socialization on this is how a woman should behave, or you can't ask questions to an official. It takes years to be able to stand up and take that space. So I think part of simple things that we can do and be aware of in spaces that now when I go, sometimes I know that I have to keep quiet and I have to let other people speak. So constantly assessing that helps in making the space. The other challenge is apart from women sort of being able to speak up themselves, is also that even if they do end up speaking up, they're not taken as seriously and action isn't taken. So I think consistently working and being patient towards building that change is something that one has to keep working on, and remember that you have to be patient. But I think I would go amiss if I didn't acknowledge a lot of the work that these people's movements have done. In a place like Rajasthan or Bihar, I have learned and been inspired immensely by the consistent effort over the years. So I think that consistent effort is also required in being able to make that space. It's not an overnight thing. It takes time. Yeah.
I am going to make space for everyone in the auditorium, though I have lots of follow-ups, to engage us in the conversation. Does anybody have a single question that they'd like to ask? Wow, I see you up there. Estefania is going to run. One.
Thanks so much. Really, really interesting. Can you hear me? Great.
Yes.
I wanted to ask both of you, actually, maybe if you could share what are the social norms based on gender or gender stereotypes that underlie, well, in the case of Nigeria and what we've seen, this limits to women participating in politics, and in the case of India, all these other limitations related to what you just exposed, and invite us to jointly think whether those social norms based on gender or gender stereotypes aren't also present in our daily lives in different contexts, regardless of how developed we think our own contexts are. Thank you.
Like the World Bank where you work, right? I wouldn't suggest that. Actually, I would, but all right. VK, do you want to go first?
Great. Thank you so much for that question. And it's one of the things I actually was going to say as I listened to Sakina's responses. Social norms is such a big part of what we're working towards sort of addressing. And that's why I talked about behavioral changes. Because, for example, in Nigeria, you have cases, and it varies across the different sort of regions. So being able to understand the cultural differences in the settings you're working with has been something that has really been a part of what we do. So in the northern part of Nigeria, or even like in the south or whatever, you have cases of seeing women run and seeing people asking, well, how can a woman lead men? A place should be a home, or even if she's running against a man, without looking at the campaign agenda or the agendas that she's pushing to sort of work on when she gets into office. It's a gendered type of discussion where they sort of see a natural leadership that goes through like a man versus, say, a woman in this case. There's that. There's also like several other things that I probably could even like show you through our work to understand the journeys of women and how they go through from the start before the elections to when they do emerge or they don't, winners at the end of the elections. So at the very first stage, you have to get representation in the party to cinch the tickets. And a lot of these structures are also a reflection of the societies that we live in. If there are so many men that have been in the space. Before they consider a woman for the same space, it takes a great lot of due. So one, in that instance, we see societal ideals or norms also reflecting in the structures at the political level. When it gets to campaigning before or even during elections, it's also that, as well as looking at how those norms also permeate through things like gender-based violence when it comes to the electoral process. And this actually differentiates sort of the women. So you see some of them are scared, and it's like a low point in the journey. So looking at the different things, you see the bright spots, you see the pain points. A lot of the pain points looks at, saying, oh, you're a woman, what do you even know? It's the limited experience, limited resources, also seeing that women have been disadvantaged for so long, and so they usually have less financial capabilities. You have the boys club where they're able to raise funds so quickly. We don't have that kind of club for women. And so it is crazy seeing how we can play a role to ensure that, one, they get their voices heard, they get seen. And in the words of Michelle Obama that I'm going to quote, we're not going to wait till the world is equal before we start feeling seen. And so as many women that we can get to rise above those sort of norms that really sort of put them back, that's our role in terms of how we're changing things. Finally.
Finally.
Yes,
Okay.
finally, sorry. Finally, it's like, how can we make these women role models to ensure that they can then cascade? If more women at the level of RADA, for example, is seeing women in leadership that are doing amazing things, she probably sees herself being able to even do more, and that gets a lot of more benefits to society. Thank you.
It's a comprehensive answer. What I'd like to add to that is that some differences are very stark. So you can see that 10%, and you can say something about that 10%. And it's also rather easy to count. That picture that, you could see the picture and see the problem with the photograph. But some differences are subtle, right? Like me not getting up from a chair. But I think these are things that have been written about widely in feminist literature, been discussed, and it continues. But I think that in societies like here, what I have learned is that a couple of things actually, that the subtle matters too, and that you have to find ways to be able to communicate it well in order to be able to change the subtle as well. I think one of the things that we do learn as Peace Fellows is to be able to see that nuance and to be able to challenge it in a non-confrontational way. And by that I mean that, okay, sometimes confrontation is required and you have to stand up for things, but in a way that you also give the other person that space and that opportunity to change. And I think we've gone through a lot of workshops and trainings, both as Peace Fellows and MIDP Fellows as well, in understanding that subtle, pointing it out when it happens, and for both within ourselves and the others on how to bring that change and challenge it when required. But thank you for your question. Yeah.
So I've just been given the signal that we have only a few more minutes, and in the interest of equity, the people who are not here, who are the furthest mile away, is there any question from our online audience that we can ask?
This is working. Am I here? Yes, okay, great. There's interest in how corruption and electoral manipulation can create bottlenecks to achieving either one of these things that you're looking at, and want to know if you would like to address those.
So I'm going to ask you both to keep it to 1 minute so we can get another question in. All right, Sakina, you go first this time.
The simple answer to that is yes. it will create barriers. I think the question is geared more towards the work that GBK does. But I think as far as research and representation in research is concerned, yeah, I'm not sure how corruption would play into that. Corruption definitely plays into how social policies are implemented, and it's studied fairly widely. But I think as far as research and representation is concerned, I think there's a lot more that needs to be understood and studied, both in terms of having more women, and women just being an example of a group that is vulnerable and marginalized, being a part of building the narrative. And I think that will go, first thoughts that come to mind, right? Like what GBK says is, one of the things that I picked from her work is that you got to have people come in and participate first, and then is when then you can see the substantive change. But if there is just no participation, how are you even going to be able to see the substantive change? So I guess this question is more geared towards you, GBK.
Thank you, no pressure. So how we're looking at it is getting people information, access to information. When you know your rights, you're better able to hold people that sort of gatekeep accountable. And so one of the things that we're doing is, having understood the journeys, we've sort of mapped different kinds of solutions to either the demand side or supply or just enabling environment. Our policy and advocacy work cuts across everything, and we're sort of working with different partners to see how we complement their work, how we ensure that we also sort of take space and get wins. So Electors Future Lawmakers Program, for example, is actually looking to give women access to trainings that allow them that when they do get into the legislative spaces, they have understanding of how the system works. They also know what needs to be done, and they can make changes from the inside, whether it's corruption, whether it's sort of electoral reforms that need to take place to reduce the bias and all of those things. And also, like, at the data level, we've launched these tech platforms to ensure that we can get gender disaggregated data, to ensure that we can actually follow through all of the policies. How is it impacting women? How is it impacting everybody in society? So yeah, this is some of the things that how we sort of capture our work to sort of address these things at sort of a root cause level.
Thank you. Good job. All right, I have managed to get us one more question from the floor, and I'd like to challenge the women amongst us. Please. Okay, I see you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is awesome. I am interested in, because in your flow chart that you have had up there, it has feeling drained after elections. And I wonder where you two individually, where you find your resilience, your sense of belonging. What is it that gives you the focus and the drive, the community, whatever you need to be able to keep doing this year after year after year? Where's your long-term hope?
First to GBK, then to you, Sakina.
One, it's super important, and I think this issue has not been reflected as much. And even in our work, what we're trying to do is to work with all of the women who have competed in election to see, can we get you access to psychosocial support to help you lift your spirits up as well after the process and keep you grounded in your work as you continue to push forward. But even for us, like seeing places where we get wins has been good. Seeing all those women and even the youngest, female legislator is such sort of a go forward factor. Like keep pushing, you can do it. But also when questions come across like, oh, why? I mean, that's not an issue. What are you doing? Where is this leading to? It sort of drains you as well. And all of those things is, all of my education at Duke has really helped me to sort of put that at the center, like, you're doing things. It's gonna take a while. All of these wicked problems, like they like to put it, it takes a while, and it takes you just being steadfast, being patient, but not working alone. I think the problem will be when you try to feel that you can change the world by yourself. You're part of a bigger structure. And so building complementarity, working with so many actors, and building an ecosystem, which is where we saw like ecosystem sensitization, we can't do it alone. So it's like, you need to save yourself from yourself by not putting all of yourself to sort of get drained, but working with others to sort of build resilience and support across board. Thank you.
The ecosystem flushes through. Sakina, last word. Last
Thank
mile.
you. Yes. I think that answer is not very difficult. I mean, I think there is so much support that people show. Right before my presentation, I met Brenda Newman, and Brenda said, don't worry. I said, I'm nervous. And she said, don't worry, we're a family. You're presenting to family. And that's pretty much it, right? I mean, I think the environment here has been incredibly enabling. And not to say that we don't go through those days and those times. We do, but we've been there for each other, and it's the last mile, we've almost made it. So that does help. Yeah, I was looking for you, Brenda. There you are. So I think the support that comes from these networks of solidarity and goodwill that we build is incredibly important. It also helps to see and get inspired by other people who are doing this work, right? So for me, learning from what the others are doing here is incredibly inspiring and gives you a lot more energy to keep going and keep doing it. So it's not just, it's the family that we have here, but back at work as well, the support systems that we have that help us keep going.
Thank you very much for being our family. So thank you, Jimmy K. Thank you, Sakina.